Thank you very much. It's 22 days until the London Olympics begins. More than 10,000 athletes from more than 200 different countries are going to be there. So what does it take to be an elite athlete? What does it take to make it to the top of your sport? Let me formally introduce our panellists for you here today. In the middle we have Elka Whalan, or Elka Graham as you would have known her when she was competing. Competed at the Sydney and the Athens Olympics, silver medal here in Sydney. Held a number of Australian, Commonwealth and world records during her swimming career. After sport, she's moved into the media and also into modelling. And who can forget Dancing with the Stars? Well, I think Elka's trying to, but she's not been able to just yet. Jeremy Rolleston, like Elka, is a dual Olympian competing in bobsleigh at both the Torino, Italy and the Vancouver, Canada Games. Jeremy also played some representative rugby as well at the same time that he was involved, or just before being involved in the bobsleigh. And as if bobsleigh wasn't dangerous enough, Jeremy decided to get involved in the world of high finance and is the General Manager of Institutional Business with Perpetual Investments. Nick Farr-Jones, 63 test match, 39 of them as captained the Wallabies to a Bledisloe win in 86, a Rugby World Cup in 91, another Bledisloe win in 92. You sound pretty good, don't you?
Well, I wasn't captain in 86, I can assure you that, Luke.
You weren't captain, no.
There's a chap called Andrew Slack who would be greatly
No,
offended.
no. I wasn't saying you were captain then, but you were part of that winning side, weren't you? Followed up the Bledisloe with beating the Springboks in 93 as well. With a background in law, been involved in investment banking in France, and now you're involved with Taurus Funds Management here. Is all of that true?
Roughly.
Roughly. A few little corrections you might like to make. Okay, this is the first question. What kind of sports people were you when you were younger? What sports did you get involved in? And what kind of competitor were you? Nick, we'll start with you.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. We're just talking, as those introductory videos were going on, about our families, and wonderful that Elka's got two youngsters, and Jeremy, we've turned the Bunsen burner up on him to get married and start this thing, because I've got 4 kids. The reason I say that is that I look at my children, my girls are 21 and 19, the boys are 16 and 12, and I'm sure that there's a lot of parents out in the audience today, and it sort of drives you to drink when at the age of 12 or 13 you're buying your kids compulsory laptop computers. When I was growing up, I grew up in the Sutherland Shire, Gymea and then Cronulla, and my recollection, I mean, of course colour TV, I think, came in 73. I'll never forget it. And I think it was, the cricket that I saw first, and the green, it was amazing. But my recollection, basically, of growing up in the south of Sydney was running into my 2 brothers. I was the middle of 3. There was 4 years that separated us. Running into my 2 brothers under the Hills hoist, playing a million sports, always being outside. Never in, you didn't have computers in those days. So, of course, you didn't have mobile phones. So Mum would let you go. Mum would release you in the morning, and holidays and the weekend. Make sure you're back by sundown, and we did everything. And it was, sometimes when I reflect on my growing up and what were the elements that allowed you to transition to top sport, there was no doubt, a part of all the sports was swimming as a young person. So at the age of 6, I was chasing the big black snake. Did all right at that and won a state championship at North Sydney, but then my parents at the age of 12 put a straw hat on my head, sent me 90 minutes in the morning and 90 minutes home to a school at Stanmore, and so the swimming got carved off. But I then went on to middle distance running. So those sports gave me a really good understanding of the blood, sweat and tears required and the discipline to if you want to go after the best. But it really was a million sports. And when I played against my brothers, I'll always remember we loved golf. And you'd always put up a prize. And it was often the best golf ball in your bag. And so whenever you were in the backyard and under that Hills hoist playing a million sports and derivatives of the sports, there was a prize at stake. And so it was competition. So and you wanted to win desperately.
Were your brothers as competitive as you?
No, no. I was a bastard when I was young. I mean, as Peter Fitzsimons, who wrote my biography, one of my great mates, when I went through the transitioning period of actually going to church, which was it was an interesting sort of exercise as well. I had a wonderful family. I'm very fortunate to still have my parents, who sacrificed enormously for us and gave us every opportunity, which gave me opportunities in sport. But when I think back to the question again, sorry, I've just lost me.
Your competitiveness in your brothers.
Oh yeah, no, sure. When I think back to why I was more competitive, I suspect it's just, I mean, Fitzy, that's right, when he wrote my biography, he talked about the change of my nature when I actually did become a Christian person. He interviewed mum and dad and my brothers and a bunch of close people. And all of a sudden I went from this person who was really aggressive, particularly when I didn't win, to someone who became far more calm, far more understanding. And I know there's a lot of Christians in the room, and that was obviously just the presence of the Holy Spirit within you, and that you get that natural change. But I think I was a reasonable person, reasonably likeable, but I hated losing.
Okay.
And that was a huge difference between me and my two brothers.
Okay.
I really wanted to squeeze the lemon.
Sports when you were younger, Elka, what were you involved in?
I think one of the wonderful things about living in this country is that you have the accessibility to be involved in everything. And what Nick was just saying then in terms of, swimming or running, or whether that be nippers or football. I mean, I got to do it all because having, 6 in our family was very, very big. So I'd go watch my brother, play footy, or then my sister go to ballet. And for me, it all started doing nippers, growing up in the Northern Beaches. And from there, I just had a love of swimming. At the age of 4, I went along with my older brother and sister and just really fell in love with it and started doing it half an hour, just once a week. And I would just muck around at the age of 4, and my parents would have, the old school video camera with the big VHS tapes, and I'd just muck around, and as soon as they saw my parents film, then I'd put my head down and I'd kick really hard just for those 10 seconds. So I really just had a connection right from the start with water, and I absolutely loved it.
Were you competitive? Did you hate losing like Nick?
Well, yeah, I did, but I think maybe a different degree. If I did, I'd be like, oh, that was a shame. I might go home, have a few tears about it, realise what I needed to do to take the next step up, and then go along with it. But I've always been competitive, and I just got to the point, I think, in my swimming career that when I would lose or when I would win, I think the biggest thing is when you do have your highs, you really know when you're a top athlete is when you do win and you succeed, is when you still go back with your coaches and your team and go, okay, great, I won, but let's still look at the video and see what we can do better next time, because there's someone who is tapping away at your ankle wanting to succeed you. So I always wanted to know, win or lose, what I could always done better.
Yep. Jeremy, you've been involved, you've represented Australia at the Winter Olympics in bobsleigh. You've also played some representative rugby. What other sports were you involved in as a kid, and what kind of competitor were you?
Well, I grew up playing soccer. In fact, I used to play against Matt Burke. He was on Carlingford Redbacks, and I was the Penno soccer team. Look, I played lots of different sports. I did a lot of little athletics. Funnily enough, in my worst moment ever in sport, it was a little athletics moment that came to mind, because I just crashed in the Olympics unexpectedly. All the media wanted to talk to me, and the only voice, and that was the last thing I wanted to do, of course, and the only voice in my head was my father, the same voice that I had when I lost a race in little athletics, going, you win gracefully or you lose gracefully, and that was the little voice in my head. What would they expect of an Olympian at this point?
Okay, now you were obviously successful when you were younger. What was the key factor in that? Was it natural ability? Was it determination? Was it family support? What do you think the kind of key factor was in achieving in sport in your earlier years? Start with Nick.
Look, I was good at sport, but I played the million sports that I spoke about, and as Jeremy said, soccer was my game until I went to Stanmore and I turned up at the first winter training and I said, where's the round balls? And they said, we don't play with those at this place. And I said, well, this game of rugby you're going to introduce me to, is there a position for me? And it was an inclusive game. There's a position for every body type. I was the littlest guy. I became scrum half. I still remember seeing steel studs for the first time at that first training. My coach was a guy called Clive Woosnam, a wonderful man, was my geography teacher. I said to Mr. Woosnam, sir, what happens if someone treads on you with those? 20 test matches against the All Blacks. Later, you quickly find out what happens when someone treads on you. But, I think it's a combination. I think that you have to have a certain amount of skill. There's no doubt about that. But like I say to all young kids, like I say to my kids, I've got 4 children, it's the difference in their sporting ability, academic ability. I mean, I think God is amazing how through the same genes, He created these different people with different passions. I mean, I'm just a great believer when I speak to young people about, it's what I call the finders, minders, binders and grinders. When I was up at Bligh Street, a couple of streets up, and I had my first day in the legal office in 1985, I went to the senior partner and said, Mr. Holden, you know, my first day in the firm, what sort of lawyer do you think I should be? You know, a litigant, a property lawyer, a commercial lawyer? I'll never forget his answer. He said, Nick, don't worry about the sort of law, work out what sort of person you are. And that's what he said. There's finders, minders, binders and grinders. And I've lived off that all my life. You know, when I went to Paris and became a banker, the cracks in the ceiling were opening up at 2 in the morning. Why on earth have I done this? Got out of my comfort zone, taking a family to a place where I can't speak the language, don't know the culture, haven't been trained to be a banker. But I realised that I could do a role, and if I surrounded myself with other people. And I think for young people, it's really important to work out what you're passionate about. So it's what you're good at and the skill level. It's what you're passionate about. But then, of course, there is the blood, sweat and tears component. I'm sure Elka and Jeremy would agree. And people, you know, the best players that I played with were the Campeses, the Liners, the Eels, the Horans, the Poitevins, the Tim Gavins. There was one common denominator. People said, well, they grow up and play under 21 rugby and schoolboy rugby. I didn't play first 15 for my school. They were always gifted. They were naturally gifted. Of course, they're going to pull on a gold jersey and build out their anthem. But the one common denominator of the best players that I played with was that they understood the need to do the hard yards. They were always the last on the training field. And you know, so it's a combination of skills, passion.
Okay, so a few
you
things.
know, and
what would you say for each of you guys? Natural ability, determination, family support. What do you think was the thing that really fed the hunger for you when you were younger?
I would say the same. I couldn't add to that.
Okay.
I'd say when you're young, it's a lot of natural ability. It's when you get older and you get to that more senior level that you start adding everything onto natural talent. And I guess not necessarily when you're young, but I said before, when you're older, it's amazing that when you talk to a lot of people, they weren't necessarily the best at what they did, whether it's not making the first 15, whether it's there's plenty of other people more talented than me, but these people do these things in sport, so it's everything else that gets added to what is a natural talent.
Okay.
My coach used to tell me that there were a few different types of athletes. There were the ones that were gifted, and then there was the natural ability, and then there was just talented and then hardworking, and all four of them are special in their own right. And, you know, to put it into perspective, so someone gifted, I would say, would be someone like Rafael Nadal. Someone with natural talent, I would say someone like Federer. Someone that is talented, I'd say someone like Leighton Hewitt. And someone that's hardworking, you know, I'd say someone like Brooke Hansen, you know, who missed 2 Olympics by, you know, a fingernail and still just kept putting in the hard yards and then ended up making it and winning a silver medal. So there's those 4 types of people, but someone like Brooke Hansen, who was hardworking, got up against someone who had complete and utter natural ability and gifted like Elisa Jones and still managed to beat her and win a medal. So I think definitely mental discipline. Whilst I agree with both what men would say, my biggest thing would be to say no excuses. I just got to the point in my career where I just knew if I was, you know, exactly what Nick was saying, the last one on the field, the last one in the pool, that I hadn't missed a training session, that I took care of myself. And so when I got up on the blocks, I had no excuses. I had no need to have a fear of nervousness. It was more an excited nervousness. Because when I got up to perform, I knew I'd put in the hard work. I had absolutely no excuses. And so if I won that race or I lost it, I didn't lose it and go, oh, it was because I had a cold or because I had this. I just wasn't good enough on the day. So it was back to the drawing board and finding out what I needed inside of me to make that next step to be the best in the world.
Okay. Who was the captain who played halfback in the first 15 at Newington?
Oh, a guy called Murray McGain. We stay in touch. I mean, that team was a very good Newington team. I mean, I think the Newington team won 2 years ago, the premiership, but the last time they won was the year I left, 79. So it was a great Newington team. I was very privileged to captain the seconds back then. I only saw my first rugby test a year before I played one. So I grew up in the south. Dad took us to the cricket test at the SCG. Okay. You know, the old rigmarole, taking the esky in and you sit there and the old man would drink KB cans. And my parents sacrificed enormously. It's just that rugby wasn't a part of really my growing up and what have you. So, you know, I was playing second division in 83 for Sydney Uni. I went and saw my first rugby test, Australia play Argentina, in 83 at the Sydney Cricket Ground. And then for some reason, well, we could go on about some of the stuff we've just spoken about, but...
Well, it's my question for each of you. At what point did you say, I want to do this? Was it at age 4 when your mum and dad are taking you down to the pool? Well, I want to start with you, Jeremy, because how in the world do you ever end up in bobsleigh? I mean, seriously, we don't even have a track in this country. How do you make that transition?
Yeah, it's pretty random, I know. I was playing rugby. In fact, it's great having Nick here because one of my highlights would be my first year of first grade in 1992. I was 19 and just getting to play against people like Nick and David Campese, remembering that in 1991 they'd won the World Cup. So I guess I class myself as a lot more of a rugby player in my own mind, but I was playing over in Italy. I'd come back to renew my visa and contract back here and just wasn't sure if I was going to go back. And I met a guy who was in the Winter Olympic squad, one of Steve Bradbury's teammates. Do you all remember Steve Bradbury? Yep. So I was one of his teammates, and he said, well, if you're not sure of what you want to do, I know you're fast, you could put on some more weight and add some strength, why don't you try bobsleigh? And I was like, yeah, mate, I'm not Jamaican, it's Australia. But that was the sliding doors moment. And the funny part of the story is Prince Albert used to bobsleigh, and he flew us over to Monte Carlo for a competition called the World Push Championships. And so this was September, French Riviera, Monte Carlo, free trip, done this competition. And they've gone, do you want to do bobsleigh? I'm like, do I what? And I'd actually never seen a real bobsleigh go down a real hill.
But you signed up, you're ready to compete.
I signed up, and then when I saw it in January in Innsbruck, the first sled go down, I do remember having a moment of, how can I get out of this without it looking embarrassing?
Just hamstring, I think that's what you do at that point, yeah. Elka, when was the moment for you? Was it a gradual thing that you said, I want to be an Olympian, or did it happen at a particular point?
I always absolutely loved swimming, and I always was surrounded, one of four as well, so just absolutely loved being involved in sports, and just blessed that was our weekend activities. And for me, it was when the Sydney 2000 Games were announced. I remember kind of being at home on the couch when they announced it at some ridiculous time at 3:30 in the morning, having a hot chocolate with my mum and dad, and you heard the winner is Sydney. And I really just knew in my heart, I was like, wow, I'm going to be 17, just turning on 18, that would be great to go to. And so for me, it only happened 9 months out.
Okay.
I was swimming 2 minutes and 9 seconds for 200 freestyle, and Susie O'Neill was swimming 2 minutes, so there was a 9-second difference between us. And in 9 months, I just dropped a second per month. And I'd never made any team before, didn't have any rep level, didn't actually make a final at school swimming. So the first team I ever made, I had $210 to my name at 17 when I made the team, and then winning a silver. I got a check, you boys were laughing, the jobs you're in, I got a check for $7,500 and hit up some fund or some kind of big building that I went into the city and sat down with them, and I thought I had so much money, $7,500. And they said, so, what are you wanting to do? And I'm like, I want to buy a house. And they're like, well, this is good, and what else do you have? I'm like, no, this is it. Like, I've had 210, I've got $7,500, and then I had to learn about the tax man and GST, and so I just always knew in my heart that I wanted to make it. And for me, it was a complete and utter mental change, and to look at the likes of Kieran Perkins and Susie O'Neill and Thorpe, who I was training with, and then 9 months later, like being on the team and shaking their hands, going, oh my gosh, we're on the same level, and rooming with them, and it was a really humbling experience, but it also made me sure it doesn't matter how fast you swim or how fast you run on the field, that we're all the same type of people, and whether you make $1 million or $1, we're just as important as each other.
And a home Olympics.
Yeah, exactly. That was amazing.
So was it sitting out there watching the Argentina game? Or?
No, not really. Very similar to Elka. I mean, she said 9 months really before she transitioned to the top. I mentioned that. That exactly like Elka, who didn't make the finals, I didn't play first 15. I was really happy where I was and how I was playing. And I went to university, all the other sports got carved off, and I grew a little bit, and I started to play alongside people like Michael Hawker, who in a way was a great mentor from both a sporting and a business perspective. And no, I don't think I ever dreamt or visualised or really thought I could be a Wallaby. It wasn't something that was a part of my thinking, albeit I didn't want to die wondering how good I could be at rugby. And so I worked really hard. And when I say like Elka 9 months out, I went away at the beginning of '84 for 5 weeks with Australian universities on a tour to the UK and Ireland. And it was on that tour that I was announced out of the blue to go on a Sydney tour. I'll always remember it because in those days, amateur rugby always flew the cheapest airline, which was what was that Indonesian airline? Garuda. And to get to London was 7 stops. And we flew Australian University's Garuda, and I came back and had 2 weeks back here and then We flew Garuda to London with the Sydney team. But all of a sudden, I jumped above sort of 4 or 5 guys that I would have thought their cab was in front of mine in the rank. Okay. You know, guys like Brad Burke, Adrian McDonald, that had always been picked in under 21 teams before me, which didn't bother me. They were better players and what have you. But all of a sudden, someone said, you've got to have a look at this fella from Sydney Uni, and I got picked, and then the next transition was New South Wales, and then later that year, the Grand Slam Tour.
39 games as captain.
36.
36. Was that something that you aspired to once
No,
you
not
were in
at
the
all.
team?
I mean, look, I had my moments with my first coach, Alan Jones. We got on wonderfully for a while. Then, you know, Alan formed what we called the JIC, the Jones Inner Circle. Not a good thing when you're dealing with a team sport. We had a disastrous inaugural World Cup year. Started that year as favourites to win the World Cup. Of course, the Kiwis won. Daylight came second. We went away at the end of that year to Argentina. The beginning of the year, it would have been unthinkable that we could lose a series to Argentina, but we lost that series. Alan got dumped. Out of the blue, Bob Dwyer was reappointed. Interesting you should say with Prince Albert, because I was playing with a team called the Bahrain Warblers in a 7-a-side tournament in Monaco, and we had dinner at the Paris Hotel, and Albert was our host. And it was there that, for some strange reason, it was my mother-in-law who called and just said, I was listening to the radio and you've just been announced as Wallaby captain. I mean, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I would have thought McCabe was parked 8th or 9th in the rank. You know, guys like Poitevin, Liner, a whole bunch of guys in front of me. And it was really because of that sadly Alan thought I was behind his dumping. Right. And that's when our relationship really soured. And yeah, we're fine now. We're broken bread. We move on. But no, I had no ambition. Mind you, I did captain a lot of teams when I was a young fella.
Okay. Have we got some SMS questions? We might just take a minute and go through some of those. What kept you? This is for each of you. What kept you going and growing as a Christian, especially when the attention came to your sport? Now, can I kind of expand on that question? Were you Christians at the time that you were sort of at the peak of your sport? And if you were, what difference did it make? If you weren't, do you think it would make a difference going back and being a Christian in that position? Jeremy?
I was a Christian throughout my sporting career. I became a Christian when I was 15. My family isn't Christian. But I think being a Christian in terms of making a difference to my actual performance, I don't think it made a big difference, but I think it made a big difference in my outlook on sport and the place that sport held for me. Because if you want to be good at anything, and it's the same with work, I think you do have this wrestle of, if you're going to be focused and dedicated, it can become your God. And I saw that. That was myself through some of my sporting days. So I would say that being a Christian was quite influential in that part for me.
Okay, in preparation for the Sevens, you damaged your knee?
Yeah, one of my lowest points was, again, I'd played in Australian universities, teams and things like that, but that wasn't a senior team, and I was in the Australian Sevens squad, and 2 weeks before the Hong Kong Sevens, which would have been my Wallaby jersey, I snapped my knee, and they took 2 squads away. We just happened to be playing the A and the B side in the quarterfinal. And I can remember knowing, when you've injured yourself badly, and I knew I was lying on the ground and I said, God, I'll honour you no matter what. But I didn't feel it. I just said that. And I remember through that period just wondering, God, why? But someone gave me some really good advice. They said, maybe you won't get the answer why, but maybe the question to ask is, where are you, God, in all of this? So for me as a Christian, I guess it just came back to the basics of, to my teammates, I didn't want to be a hypocrite. And to me, I wanted God to be real in my life every single day. But that didn't translate into how I performed on the field. Okay, all right. Elka, for you, your Christian life and different stages perhaps for you?
Well, my mum is actually Jewish and my father is Christian, and we were brought up going to Sunday school. And then the typical, you get to 14, 15 and you drift away, and surf life saving became more important. And I always had a love of God and always been a Christian, but I guess I was just, just hanging parallel to him. And, I'm a big believer that if you're not kind of moving forward with God, well then, how are you supposed to grow with him? So the turnaround came for me when I was about 23. I just woke up, and that was 7 years ago. And I just realised that, the next man I wanted to meet, I needed it to be real, and I wanted to fall in love and do everything the right way. But it also was around the time when I was going to the Athens Olympics as well. And it just really put things in perspective for me, because it level-headed me, it kept me grounded. It showed me that there was so much more other than the pool, that I was bigger than what swimming was. I really got to stop and appreciate those second Olympics for myself, of all senses, of taking everything in. And it was a knowing that no matter where I was in my life, that, 24/7, that God is available, and that he's my best friend, and that I have this continual relationship with him. And I am who I am. I am self-assured and confident, and I know who I am and where God has put me in this world because of him. And we are all born with a gift. It's just a matter of nurturing it and using it. And so I got to the point where I wasn't swimming, and I thought, well, God's given me this gift. When people say, oh, you got this pay rise, or, Nick, you're working here, or Jeremy, you're doing this, it's great, you're so talented. And my question behind all that is, yeah, but who gave you the talent? So if God's put you in a position, then he wants to put you in a position of power and authority, and that's getting rid of all ego and everything with it, and just moving forward to exactly what that was. And I remember being in the village, and someone came up to me once and said to me, people that believe in God are weak because they have to believe in something to get through each day. And I thought, it was really interesting, this person coming up and saying that to me. But I also thought, wow, having God in your life, and for me being a Christian, there's a sense of purpose. And God has a purpose and a plan for us all. And so to wake up every morning, I'm excited, because I love to know what he has in store for me. And so I would never touch the wall if I won or lost and said, oh God, why did that happen? He's got enough problems to deal with. It was just more so, okay, God's put me in this position, and I'm at the top of my sport here. How does he want me to handle this? Because people will be watching. And I think sometimes God uses you in quiet ways, where you are getting up and you might have won or lost, and they want to see how humble you are when you win or when you lose.
Okay, Nick?
It's interesting, Elka. I mean, you talk about the person who said you've got to be weak and feeble to have a need of God in your life. I try and get into the Word most days, and there's one thing that I've never read in the Word, that when you become a Christian, you get a red carpet rolled out in front of you. It's a tough life. Yeah. It's a hard road to walk, and you can read about that in the Bible, but it's a fantastic life that gives you peace. Like Jeremy, I didn't grow up in a Christian house. As I said, wonderful parents, very close family, but the one thing we didn't really have in our life growing up was a church life. I mentioned at the age of 17, late 16s, I was breaking the law, having a few beers at Cronulla Leagues Club with my neighbour. We went up for a pizza on a Sunday night. Met a couple of very beautiful women. As I was saying, God, I think, moves in very mysterious ways. But the deal was that if I was going to see them again, I'd be at Caringbah Baptist Church the next Sunday. That was that was how I sort of got introduced to church.
They were youth workers in disguise.
Absolutely. Well, they were having a coffee after church that Sunday night. But it's interesting because, I went to Miranda Primary. I went to Newington College, a Christian school. We say we live in Christian communities, Christian towns, cities, country, and yet the thing that really stood out for me as I started to regularly attend Caringbah Baptist and experience that agape love of the people, and I think for the first time at the age of 17, I really started to hear the gospel, and we think we live in a Christian country and go to Christian schools, and yet I don't think I'd ever heard the undiluted message of why Christ came and hung on a cross for us. And we've all, I know there's many Christians in the room. We all have our stories about how the Holy Spirit impacted us and how we put up our hand. Now, I've been a Christian now for 33 years, and that went through, of course, my representative sporting time. A little bit like my sporting days, there were some great weeks, great months, great years, but there were also some lousy weeks, lousy months and lousy years, and so has been my spiritual walk. There were years where God used me mightily and blessed people and what have you. But that effectively was when the branch was connected to the vine. When I was in tune, when I was prepared to do the hard yards. We spoke about doing the hard yards. When, I'm a great believer, and it was very much part of our changing the culture of the Wallabies in the late 80s to a team that we called scoreboard focused, to a team that became process driven, that took us from a very inconsistent team to a very consistent team. The last 25 tests I played, we won 21, including a World Cup. we were too desperate to win when I talk about scoreboard focus instead of what's the process individually, collectively, and it goes way beyond the 80 minutes. But I'm a big believer that maturing as a Christian is the same. You know, I think if people said, what's your favourite verse? I'd have to go to Matthew 6:33, because you've got to seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and then things will be added unto you. You know, there's a process to becoming a mature Christian and being used. To answer your question, Luke, it's interesting because I'm a great believer in the planting of seeds and other people watering. You know, and just for an example, I don't have a white halo around my head. Rugby touring was a wonderful way of life. We went hard, we played hard. When you pulled on a green blazer and a gold jumper, the responsibility and all that was critically important. But did we enjoy ourselves? Did we go out and have a few beers? Absolutely. Was I always perfect? No way. But I think when I reflect back on those days, generally speaking, people would have said, you know, Farr-Jones, we appreciated his faith, his belief, and the way he conducted himself. And, you know, I was invited to speak at a men's Saturday morning breakfast at church, and there was one of my old Sydney University rugby mates, a prop forward, and sometimes we should never judge people because this guy was a hard man. He played hard. Tony Abbott was his on the other side of the scrum. Tony was totally different, but this guy played hard, went hard, you know, loved the women, drank hard, and he was the guy who invited me to this breakfast. And I remember saying to him, I said, Abbo, Matho, how did you become a Christian? Which is totally the wrong thing to say, but he said, look, there's many things that impacted me. But he said, I'll never forget also, back in 1982, when we'd go on those long bus trips, you know, to the next port of call, with Sydney University Rugby when we're in Europe, and he said, you'd always spend half an hour sitting in the middle of the bus reading your Bible. He said, that always impacted me. And so I think as Christians, never underestimate the seeds that you plant that other people might water later. And I think that over the years, I've planted quite a few seeds. And I know that, for example, my great mate Peter Fitz, who's been involved in this forum, who bags us Christians and whatever, we've had some fantastic debates and arguments about faith and spirituality, often at 2 a.m. in the morning with that last cognac, you know, in front of the fire and what have you. But you know, I love representing what I believe in, my faith, the spirituality, the way I hope that you see your kids as they grow up to make good, strong, independent decisions that you know, it's rooted in their connection with Christ. Okay.
In your careers, toughest thing, physical or mental?
It's always mental. And when I say mental, I don't just mean here, I mean here as well. So for me, one of the toughest things was putting my heart back on the line to go for my dreams again. So I had this disappointment in rugby where I didn't get my Wallaby jersey, missed out on the Commonwealth Games sevens that year. That was the first ever year. They won a bronze medal. Went overseas to play, come back, get into bobsleigh. 2002, we qualify. Oh my goodness, I'm going to become an Olympian. That was a childhood dream. Bang, you're not going. They've decided not to send you. But what do you mean? We've qualified. And we're the only country in the world that qualified that didn't go to that Olympics. And because the Australian Olympic Committee can decide whether to send you or not, and they decided that 27th wasn't good enough in terms of our ranking. So then to put my heart back on the line in 2006 to go to my first one, that was the biggest challenge, and that wasn't physical, and that was here.
Okay. Physical or mental?
I do think it's a combination of both. I mean, this sounds sickly and crazy, but some of my best sessions I had were the ones that I would like vomit afterwards because I just physically pushed myself to the limit. And just get up and you just be throwing up like literally just clear water because that's all I'd been drinking through that session. And there's this amazing feeling, as crazy as it sounds, and I miss that. And having my husband now who's competing and going to 4 Olympics, you know, I know that feeling when, you know, you get home and whether it's been you've worked a really hard day or you've trained the hardest, and every single muscle in your body is aching and it hurts. But for me, it was a really comforting feeling because I thought, wow, look at what my body's done today. I've given it the absolute all. So it was just this amazing feeling of, I appreciated little things more of like getting into a bath with like the Epsom salts, turning on my electric blanket and just going, oh yes, God, you know, like thanks for that. Because I knew what my coach would say. It was like an investment in the bank. That's another $1 in the bank. You know, that's another training session. And so I just keep depositing depositing. And then when that race came, he'd be like, okay, Elka, it's time to withdraw it all and just unleash. So definitely, I think the majority of the career is certainly physical, but there needs to be consistent mental discipline and focus and attitude, and you need to believe that you're the best as well, and keeping all that under a humble umbrella.
Okay. Physical and mental, try and be shorter than these guys.
I would say both, but I was always very well prepared physically. I just, like deposited in the bank. I always worked hard away from the team. It was just part of my DNA. There was, I recall the 91 World Cup. I think there was a lot of, I didn't realise it at the time, but a fair bit of anguish, mental anguish with the responsibility of captaining a young team. And I was the only guy who was crook, or at least the only guy sober on that Sunday morning after the World Cup, because the boys partied hard. But I went home after the event. I left the dinner crook, and I was also crook on the Wednesday. It was a bit of the stress and all the pressure. So it was physical and mental. I think in life generally far more. When I stopped, I stopped. So I, people say, well, you look fit. Well, looks can be deceptive. I stopped. I went 180 degrees, and I had a slip disc last year, and I haven't run for a year. So I don't feel any of that mental pressure. With my spiritual and working life, it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. I can get up at 5 in the morning and get into the Word, but it's then once I think, well, this is what God's saying to me.
Put it into action.
Well, absolutely, and I think we all appreciate it. It's bloody hard. That I know this is what God wants me to sacrifice and give up and do this, and yet we can be so comfortable in the lifestyle that we've got that we don't.
Yep.
And I think most Christians, they stumble because of that, and they often don't get the answers to prayers because you just don't have that discipline and commitment, knowing what God wants you to do to carve the stuff off.
Okay.
Being armed with the weapons,
Yep.
you give up and going to the fight.
Okay. Now, we need to wrap up very quickly here, but aspiring young athletes, or perhaps even business people in the audience, possibly some business people, definitely doesn't look like there's any athletes out there.
You all do look good.
It is winter. It is winter.
What would be, and it needs to be very brief advice, what would be the advice that you'd want to give them if you had to give them a few words? Jeremy?
Do what you love, follow your heart, and never forget you'll always be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the things you did.
Okay. Elka?
Have no excuses. Have absolutely no excuses. You just put everything on the line, and you're going to succeed no matter what, because even if things don't go your way, you did put everything on the line and you had absolutely no excuses. So go for it. If you have a dream, don't let anybody else squash it for you. Surround yourself with a dream team and be around positive people.
Yeah, all those things. I think work out what you really want. In sport, I wanted to find out how good I could be, individually and collectively as a team. In business, I don't have the same passion. I love working in good teams. I worked in a great mid-sized legal firm. I worked in a fantastic mining finance team for Societe Generale here that was one of the more proactive banks. I work in a funds management group now, a great team of people. I've never had an ambition to be chief executive of a company, get on the elevator north. Okay. Work out what you really want. Find yourself, as Elka said, in a great team of people where you can have fun and passion. And I think at the end of the day, don't die wondering how good you can be once you work out what you want to do.
And just on that note, it's more important to find out who you are and then work out what you want. That's a really, really big thing.
Finders, minders, binders and grinders.
Yeah, like it. Boom. Connection.
Right.
Love it.
Can you thank the panellists for me?
Thank you.
Inside the little outline that you've got on your seat there is a little response form and opportunity for you to fill in some details. So if you'd like to take a moment to do that now, there are also some pens here. And we also just wanted to mention, Jeremy, sorry, you were supposed to do this bit, weren't you, Elka?
No, you're the great MC today.
Jeremy's also written a book. Tell us about the book, Jeremy. You've got it right there.
Yeah, after my disappointment in the Olympics, I was trying to explain to people why I would always be disappointed, but I didn't regret what happened. But I never wanted a book around me. So we got together 10 really famous Australians, and we put together a book around following your dreams. But more than that, I was sick of books like The Secret that'd go, oh, just dream it and it will happen. I wanted to get in their heads about how did you actually do that. So how do you get over disappointment or fear of failure, Gay Waterhouse of failing your famous father, or do you regret Matt Shervington not being the first white man to run under 10 seconds, and how do you goal set, and quality versus quantity in training, and all of the how. And then I guess the big picture is to what end. You go after your dreams and that's fine, but to what end? And I guess that's the Christian side in me coming out, and they're not mutually exclusive. So yeah, I did bring sort of 5 copies or 10 copies today in case people would like.
Sitting out on the table there, and the cost, $20. That's ridiculous. That's a crazy price. Elka just bought one on the taxi on the way over here. So again, can you thank our panellists for us, please?